Hey, welcome to Bifocal. Today's a little bit of a different show for us. We're going to be talking about education, and not just typical education. We have an interesting guest on today, and I think you're going to find this show specifically interesting, so stay tuned. Hey, welcome back. As I mentioned today, we're going to talk a little bit about education, and I thought maybe it would be interesting from the standpoint of, with everything going on with COVID, a lot of the schools not knowing what they're doing. That's interesting. But we're going to take a little bit of a different twist on the education we're going to talk about today. I have Dean Manke, Senior Director of Academic Affairs from Invictus High School, with me today. So, Dean, welcome to the show.
Appreciate you having me on, Dan. I appreciate you using your podcast to shine a little light on kind of a hidden world in education.
Very, very good. You know, when I came across Invictus, and it was a little bit of a story how I came across it, but I found it very interesting, and I never knew anything about it, never heard of it, didn't know it existed, and I thought, Jesus, there's got to be a lot of people that don't know this exists.
Right.
So, first of all, Invictus, it's kind of an interesting name. Is there a meaning behind the name?
Yeah, so Invictus is Latin for undefeated, and I think the term is most popularized by a poem. It's the Invictus poem. I can recite the whole thing for you if you want, but it's out of the night that covers me, black as the pit from pole to pole. I give thanks to whatever gods may be for my unconquerable soul. And it's all about overcoming adversity in life. That's the big theme of the poem, and that's a big thing that we try to do at Invictus, is help our kids overcome the slings and arrows that life has put in their way. Well,
and from what I know of Invictus, that's kind of the environment there, right? Tell me a little bit about Invictus, what it is, and it's high school, right?
Yeah, so we're a Dropout Recovery High School officially. That's a special state designation. There's a handful of schools around the state with the Dropout Recovery designation, and we work primarily with kids 16 to 21 who are significantly lagged in their grade level, and frequently they come from backgrounds of trauma and poverty and significant challenges.
And you're located where?
So we have 3 campuses. I'm at our downtown campus, which is 30th and Euclid, downtown Cleveland.
In Cleveland. Okay. So dropouts, a student has to be a dropout for some reason to get involved in Invictus.
Yeah.
How do they hear about Invictus? How do they get involved? Do they want to get involved? Are you recruiting? How all does that happen?
So they come to us from a bunch of different situations. I think most frequently, and my fondest wish is, most of our kids come to us through word of mouth, because we do a good job with students and we help them get their diploma. We help them on a pathway to a
And word of mouth career. Is from other students?
Other students, because every graduate we produce kind of becomes an evangelist for us to spread the word about what Invictus is.
Yeah. So how similar would Invictus be to a normal high school?
So significantly different, both in the feel and the setup. We try to treat the students very much like adults, so it almost has a community college feel. And
is that by design?
That is by design, because a lot of the behavior goes away. A lot of the negative behaviors that have pushed these kids out of other schools, because we're not telling them to shut up and sit down most of the time. We're asking them, what do you want to be when you grow up? And how can I help you get there?
So things they didn't like in normal school, you're trying to do away with those.
Yeah. The other significant thing that's different about us is we are an asynchronous environment. So a typical school is synchronous, starts in August, runs through June, and the kids are in 7 classes a day, and at the end of the year they earn 6 credits. We are asynchronous. The kids are self-paced, so they're working through a class that they can work through independently, but they're in a room with a highly qualified teacher. So you come to us, Dan, and you are a 17-year-old with 5 credits. We analyze your transcript, figure out what classes you're missing. We put you specifically into those classes. You can work through them at your own pace. There's a math teacher in the room with you if you struggle with Algebra 2. they can help you through that class.
Interesting.
And the teachers are there to provide intervention and coaching and support and motivation.
So everybody there they're kind of in different paces where they are.
Yeah. So if you walk into our history classroom, you'll have 8 kids in there, but they're working in 5 different classes.
How difficult is that for the teacher?
It can be at times. It gets hectic when you're helping a lot of different kids and jumping from subject to subject. But for most of our teachers, they find that they're doing really specifically what they went into teaching for, and that's working one-on-one and helping a kid instead of standing up and lecturing about a topic.
Yeah.
So it's more student-centered and less teacher-centered.
So the teachers got to prepare more lesson plans and...
No, the curriculum is electronic. So the students are working through that. The teachers work a lot in adapting the curriculum, in finding alternative assignments, developing project-based learning pieces to replace items in the curriculum. So if our history teacher finds that the second semester of world history, kids are really getting hung up on Unit 3, our teachers work hard to develop alternative ways to present that information. Or if you have a math teacher and they find out that kids are really getting stuck on the quadratic formula, she can replace aspects of the curriculum with different learning tools or more hands-on aspects.
You know, that quadratic formula, that was something that really helped me a lot, right? I can remember learning it, and I'm thinking, even when I learned it, I thought, when am I going to use this?
Yeah. And a lot of times, I like to tell teachers that schools kind of are a Venn diagram where there's 2 circles, right, overlapping. And the state and teachers frequently live in this circle called rigor, where it's all about holding kids accountable to a high standard and making sure they achieve a certain level. And kids live in a circle called relevance, where what are you teaching me and what does this have to do with what I'm going to do with my life? How much transference is there? You found some use in the quadratic formula. You know, that applied to
Actually,
something.
I was being facetious.
And I say all the time, all of us in high school,
but it's an interesting point, though. I think you're right.
Yeah. We all learned what the endoplasmic reticulum was, but none of us could tell what it is today. We all learned who won the Battle of New Orleans in the War of 1812, but very few of us could say what that means.
You know, the one thing I have remembered, and I don't know why, was the decimal for pi at 0.314.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
3.14, yeah.
0.3, yeah. Why I remembered that, well, I guess I didn't remember it, but why I remembered that, I don't know.
Yeah.
So is the curriculum, it's similar, though, to a normal high school. It's state curriculum.
Yes. The state dictates certain standards that the students have to meet, so our curriculum meets those standards.
Now, does a student have to take all the same classes, chemistry, biology? They have to take those.
Yep. And they have to take all the same state tests. Now, our school in particular, the state a number of years ago came around to a decision where they allowed a third pathway where students could go around the state tests. Because ever since state graduation tests were introduced, a significant portion of inner city kids aren't graduating because they can't pass the tests. There's a lot of 30-year-olds out there floating around Cleveland without diplomas because they got their 20 credits, they finished their high school curriculum, but they couldn't pass the math test or the science test. Mm-hmm. So the state introduced another pathway because there's pendulums in education, I think, in a lot of industries where the pendulum towards career tech has swung back, where Ohio's more interested in getting kids into career tech, into jobs, and useful education, where it's more relevant, back in that relevance circle. So the state introduced a pathway where kids can earn an industry credential, and the state has a large list of possible credentials that kids could get. And with that credential and with a work keys test, which is a real specific kind of workplace skills test, they can graduate without.
Is that available in normal high schools?
Yes.
So that's available statewide through?
Yes.
Okay.
But because we're a charter school, because we're a small school, we're very maneuverable. And you see that in the business world, where small businesses are more maneuverable and able to capitalize on opportunities sometimes that big companies can't. So because we were maneuverable, we were able to jump on that pretty quick, and we worked really hard to get as many credential opportunities for our kids as we can. So we have kids completing STNA classes. We have kids doing phlebotomy classes. We have a security pathway for kids that are interested in going into a career in security or going farther into OPATA and becoming a police officer. And we looked at every possible avenue because we didn't want to have one credential that we forced all our kids into. And I've seen that at a couple schools where they've gone the food service route because there's a handful of credentials you can get. There's a serve safe credential and a handful of others. And they force a lot of their kids through that pathway because everyone can get a job in a restaurant. But, you know, the adage of when all you have is a hammer, everything starts to look like a nail. We didn't want our kids to look like nails. We wanted as many different pathways and opportunities as we could. So we, to remain flexible, outsourced a lot of our credential work through industry partners. And thanks to our business advisory council, we were able to reach into the community and find different people doing different credentials. So we were able to get kids a lot of different opportunities and also connect them to different resources in the community.
Interesting. You mentioned these students are dropouts. Mm-hmm. When they get introduced to Invictus, how do you introduce them so they're looking at this now differently than this first experience that they had,
right?
Which obviously probably was not a good one, right? Mm-hmm. That's why they're talking to you. So how do you introduce them to this is different?
Yeah. So our orientation process kind of takes that into account because most of the kids in typical district schools and regular district schools do wonderful work. They're amazing people, and I'm not disparaging their work. They succeed for most kids. If they don't succeed, it's sometimes because they felt like a number. So we very much want to be interested in that student when they come through our door. So there's an interview process, and there's 3 different interview processes where we're very much asking about you when you're enrolling with our school. So there's a social emotional process where our family advocate sits down.
Are they open?
Sometimes they're not at first. Sometimes it takes time for that relationship to develop. And that's, I should mention, the third circle that connects the rigor and the relevance is the relationship circle. So it's not the 4 R's anymore, reading, writing, arithmetic. It's the rigor, relationship, relevance circles. So we do a social emotional survey where we have a family advocate who interviews a kid and finds out what have you been through in your life, what challenges are you facing, what traumas have you been through, are you a parent, are you struggling with the justice system,
I'm assuming some of this is pretty rough background stuff.
Yeah, very much so.
Can you share any examples?
The stories of our kids are very inspirational to me because they go through so many challenges before age 16 than most of us do in our lifetimes. They go through more, mourning and more trauma and, more suffering than most of us credit. And the fact that they show up to school and they still want to learn
is a miracle.
And they still want an opportunity. Yeah. It's a remarkable thing. And a big part of what I want our school to do is to instill hope in those kids, because that's, as you know, sometimes in your darkest times, hope is what keeps you going.
You mentioned you go through this interview process. Continue that thought, because I asked you the question of
sure. So we have a family advocate that interviews them. Then we have a vocational staff that talks to them next, and it's kind of a long-winded way of saying, what do you want to do when you grow up? But do
they know? I mean, do you have any stats that say, hey, X% know, X% don't have a clue?
We are very data driven, so we have those survey results. We know what careers those kids come in interested in.
Is there any top ones that kind of stand out?
Well, part of it is because our kids have limited connections in their lives. So if they know someone who's successful, typically they work in the medical field because Cleveland Clinic, and there's a lot of opportunities there. Or they know someone who's an entrepreneur, or they know someone who does hair or nails, or someone who works in a barber shop, and that frequently
That's their exposure.
Yeah, they have one or two connections to someone who's successful, whereas you and I grew up with 10 or 15 people. Or my neighbor's an accountant, and the guy across the street is a lawyer, and you see the opportunities, and if you can't see it, it's really hard to be it. And so a big part of what we want to do is draw those connections. So we survey them, find out what they're interested in, and then we really want to expose them to other opportunities. So a big part of our vocational program, we have what's called a CBI program, a career-based intervention. Our students are working, and they actually earn work-based learning credit for their work hours. So you're in school with me for 5 hours, and you're completing your English and your math and your sciences, your social studies, and then you're going off to a job. And I have a CBI staff member who's doing workplace visits with you, and he's talking with you on a regular basis about what you're learning at that job. What do you like about it? Do you like standing up all day? Do you like being on the move? Do you like working with customers? Do you like working on computers? So there are a lot of questions that I think every school should be asking kids, because how many people get through school, get through college, get a business degree and realize they don't like business, or get an English degree and realize you can't do anything with an English degree? So we want them really thinking hard about what they like to do.
Is there more of an emphasis with your students on a non-college career versus college career?
To a certain extent, yes, because we're very data-driven and research-based, and a lot of the jobs that are hiring in Cuyahoga County, the jobs that are paying well, don't necessarily require a bachelor's.
The trades.
Yeah. And the more kids I can push into the trades, the more kids I can push into IT, the happier I am.
I have to believe when you're introducing the students to that type of information, it has to be a little bit of an eye-opener for them.
Yes.
I have to believe they're sitting back going, I had no idea that that type of opportunity was there for me. I thought I had to go to college, and I knew I could never go to college.
No doubt.
And I have to believe that it's like, man, a world's opening up to them.
Yeah, and particularly in IT fields. And that's my current soapbox, is I really want to push kids into IT fields because there's so much opportunity there. You don't need to go to a 4-year university. You can go to a 14-week boot camp. And there's a couple of really good ones in Cleveland where you can get a full stack coding certification.
And I'm sure a lot of these kids have pretty good aptitudes.
Yeah, and walk out into a $50,000, $60,000 a year job.
Interesting. Well, it sounds like right off the bat, these students are experiencing a little bit of a different flavor of school than maybe what they came out of.
Yes, we hope so.
Yeah. What kind of stats do you have that show graduation, job placement, that type of thing?
Since we became Invictus in 2012, our graduation rate has gone up virtually every year, pretty significantly. Our enrollment has gone up every year. Our workplace learning credit, we were on pace to be over $500,000 in student earnings this year, and our goal is to be over $1 million next year.
What does that mean?
That means our students are earning that money.
So the students that have graduated?
No, the students who are working while they're employed, while they're
enrolled
with us.
I understood that they got school credits, but you're saying they're actually earning income.
Yeah. We have a number of kids working at Amazon. We have a number of kids working at food service. And we track that pretty rigorously. Our CBI staff does. And we look at the different jobs that our kids are going into. And if we had looked at it 6 years ago, it would have been overwhelmingly fast food. And more as our program has developed and we've developed more relationships, and our business advisory council and a lot of other groups working with us, we're pushing kids into healthcare jobs and, working at the hospital and working at places that we never thought our kids would work.
Yeah. So is there a part of Invictus that is out working with the business community?
Yes, that's a big part of what our vocational staff does, is developing partnerships and working with training opportunities. working with different organizations that are doing things. There's a lot of great organizations in Cleveland, and that's something we knew from the get-go. There's thousands of people in Cleveland doing fantastic work with these underserved kids, but they're all kind of pulling in different directions. So a big part of what we want to be is a resource for the kids, where we're in the middle drawing the connections for the kids and being kind of the center point for them to be able to get workplace experience and get legal help and get help filling out your WIC application and all the other things that help them advance their lives.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier that your age goes from 16 to 21.
Mm-hmm.
So when a student comes in, you said they go through this assessment to gauge where they are, so we know where to drop them into the curriculum, where they start.
Mm-hmm.
So they have to be on some pace then to finish by some date.
Yes. And that's a big part of what our teachers do, is encouraging that pace.
Keep that moving.
Yeah, because self-paced learning does mean
self-paced.
You can work at a slow pace. And a big part of what we do is trying to encourage kids. Because we know when our students come to us, they come to us with a backpack full of trauma in their background. And because of that, sometimes they have a timeline. Sometimes they're a ticking time bomb because they don't have dad at home. Maybe they don't have mom at home. And suddenly grandma goes on dialysis. And that kid's attendance falls off because he has to take care of brother and sister, or a million other life situations. And we do a lot of work with attendance, because that's the biggest struggle for our kids, is getting them into school on a regular basis, because they have so much struggle in their lives. And we're out in the neighborhoods constantly knocking on doors saying, where are you at? How can I help?
So you're going doing home visits to...
Yep. And it's such a important aspect of what we do.
Is that a dedicated function within Invictus?
Yes.
That's a role for somebody.
Yep. We have an attendance specialist. That's a big part of what they do, is trying to draw connections with families.
How is that perceived by the students? Is it perceived like, wow, somebody cares about me?
Sometimes.
Or is it perceived like, hey, I don't need you here at my house?
And I think as you go through life, sometimes things hit you at the right time. And that one of my favorite stories was one of our students who, real bright, one of those kids interested in IT and someone we could push into a cool career, but lots of struggles in his personal life, and his attendance fell off. And because we're a charter school, we have a rule in place called the 72-hour rule, that if a student misses 72 consecutive hours, we have to withdraw them. And this student was getting real close to that line, and my attendance specialist, Kevin Sparks, and I went on a home visit and knocked on the door, and he came to the door, and he said something that really touched Kevin and I, that he said, I thought nobody cared.
Oh, wow.
And wouldn't you know it, his attendance picked up, graduated, enlisted in the Army, went on to a successful life. And sometimes it's just that single moment that somebody cares.
I'm assuming for yourself and the people at Invictus, that's what it's all about.
Absolutely.
It's those stories.
Yeah. Seeing kids turn the corner is such an amazing thing.
And that was a question I was just going to ask you is, can you share any major transformation success stories like that you can just remember, that were just like, man, that's why I do this? Oh,
there's lots. And that's the most rewarding thing. And one of the hardest things about this year, our graduation ceremony, one of the most joyous occasions you've ever been to. I mean, shouting and screaming and praise Jesus, hallelujah moments. And we do a rose ceremony at the tail end of our graduation after closing remarks. The kids are given a rose, and we play music, and they have to take that rose to the person that meant something to them, the person that helped them get here. And every year there's a handful of those roses that make their way to staff members. And I got to tell you, that is
that's it.
Yeah.
That's it. That's why you do it.
Yeah.
That's why you do it.
That kid had one rose to say something symbolic, and
he picks you, or he picks her.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable. What are, you mentioned attendance. What are some of the other challenges that Invictus faces?
So the students come to us with lots of challenges, and then attendance is the biggest aspect of that, but also they come to us typically significantly lagged in their ability to read, their ability to do math, their ability to do...
So just school function,
yep,
aptitude stuff.
And so we have to get them to a level where they can read at a level where they can get through the self-paced curriculum. Because if you can't read to get through the curriculum, it's going to be tough for you to maintain a rapid pace to be able to graduate in a hurry. And that's the ideal for us is we accelerate these kids' process and we help them get out of high school as quickly as we can. So we have to do a lot of interventions to get their reading up to speed and get their math up to speed and that kind of thing.
How about just transportation to and from?
Also a significant difficulty. And this is a difficulty throughout the state for charter schools is we rely on the district that the kid comes from to provide transportation. And a lot of our kids come from districts that don't transport their students. Therefore, they don't have to transport our students. So we have to budget that in our process. All of our kids get an RTA bus pass when they leave every day. It's a 2 ride so they can get home and come back to us.
So it's specifically for that.
Yep.
How do you work with local high schools? And secondly is how far out geographically does Invictus reach?
So hypothetically, we can reach us anywhere in Ohio, but most of our kids come from the greater Cleveland area. In terms of relationships with other high schools, that's, I think, an area where we've grown a lot due to area high schools beginning to understand the good work that we do with kids. And like I said, all the graduates become evangelists for you, but the guidance counselors at the other schools who see this troubled kid that they sent to you graduate, that guidance counselor becomes an evangelist for your program. And the social worker that refers a kid to your program and that kid turns their life around and does great things. Or the parole officer who refers a kid to your program and doesn't have to violate the kid's parole because they turn their life around and do good things. So a lot of the community connections have grown over the years as we've done good work, particularly the schools. And just from a cold-blooded mathematical standpoint for other schools, we almost invariably improve other schools' graduation rates because we're removing kids from their denominator so that their graduation rate improves. And that kid comes to us and graduates. And we can get credit for them as a 5th-year graduate or a 6th-year graduate. So even if they're graduating late, because we're a DOP school, there is room on our report card for us to get credit for a kid in their 7th year, whereas a typical school doesn't get credit for them after 4.
What's like the dropout rate in high schools?
It varies from school to school. I couldn't quote it off the top of my head, but it has improved in Cleveland Public, and they've done a lot of good work in improving their program and getting kids moving in the right direction.
Now, Invictus is actually providing a typical high school diploma, not a GED.
Correct.
And explain the difference.
GED, you have to pass some tests, and it's an equivalent. It's an equivalent to a diploma rather than being an actual diploma.
But Invictus, these students are getting an actual
high school diploma.
Diploma.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and for some students, the GED is a great answer. But to a certain extent, you have to be a good test taker, and not a lot of our kids are good test takers.
Interesting. So how did you get involved?
So always knew I wanted to go into education. And I think once I was in education, I realized pretty early on that this demographic is probably the most important place in the world to work, that these are the kids who need me. And if I can spend my talent somewhere, I want to spend them in the place where I can do the most good, make the most impact.
So your title, Senior Director of Academic Affairs, what does that consist of? What do you do?
So we have 3 campuses. I'm the director of the downtown campus, but I'm also the lead for academic questions across the 3 campuses. So and academics is the central thing we do. We are a school. So we do all the social emotional stuff, and we work with kids in developing connections in our wraparound services, and we do all the vocational work. And the school has to operate like a business, but the fundamental part of it is academics. So that's my baby. I get to work with the great team of teachers. They're very passionate and they care a lot about
What's your staff? What's the staff look like? Like how many teachers? How many students?
So it varies depending on the size of the campus. So we adapt staffing according to enrollment. And enrollment for us is fairly fluid because kids can drop in and drop out at any time during the year. So that can be challenging, particularly in terms of special education, which is always a percentage of your population. But for us, that percentage varies wildly from year to year. So we have to have intervention specialists on staff to work with the students in our population with special needs.
Yeah, we didn't talk about that. So Invictus offers that as well.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And then each campus has at least one highly qualified English, math, science, social studies teacher, and then more depending on how much load there is at each campus. So as a campus ramps up to 200 kids, we might have to add a second math teacher or add a second vocational specialist, or it all depends on the load at each business.
So typically, and I know that might be a tough word, but how many students on average would be in Invictus at a given time?
Sure. Most of our campuses have somewhere between 100 and 200 kids at any given time.
So you get
300
plus students going through all your campuses.
Yes. Yeah. Between the three. Yeah. We're over 400 between the three campuses.
Oh, wow.
But at each campus, there's 100 to 200 kids, and they attend in 2 different sessions. So only about half of the kids are in the building at a time. Mm-hmm. And then the percentage of them that are there on a given day, that means sometimes there's only 50, 60 kids in the building.
Do the students have to be there at a certain time?
It's fairly flexible. We have sessions that are scheduled, but it's fairly flexible because it's very student-centered. Everything about it is meant to be adapted to the student's situation. So the kid who is working mornings, clearly we have to be more flexible and let him attend the afternoon session. The kid who was working last night, we have to have some time for him to get some sleep. We have to take into account childcare. If they have to drop their child off at school before they come to us, then they might not be there for our 7:30 start time. But when they come in at 9, they will be there for the full 5-hour session.
So what's Invictus's biggest challenges as an organization? What are your challenges? What's it when your faculty gets together, and what are the challenges?
I think our biggest challenges are probably the challenges our students face, because they come from such a traumatized background, and we want to be a trauma-skilled school. And there's what they teach teachers in college is called pedagogy, the ability to deal with situations. And, when Johnny talks out during class, how do I handle that? How do I explain this concept? And our environment, because we're so trauma skilled, it's a whole different set of pedagogy. So a traditional school, if a kid is talking, one of the things you learn in college is you use proximity. You go stand next to them. But if you do that to a traumatized child, you're threatening them. And that becomes a precursor to elevated behavior rather than reducing behavior. So I learned in college I'm supposed to go stand next to Johnny and he'll calm down. And suddenly Johnny's cursing at me. So it is a growth process for us internally to train teachers fresh out of college to learn how to work in this environment.
So would your staff go through a little bit of additional training?
That's a huge focus for us is professional development. We do a ton of work internally on how do we approach kids, how do we analyze the data from the classroom, all kinds of things. And we have a whole host of professional development targets that we look at each year.
Yeah. Your teachers, where do they come from? Are you getting some teachers right out of college? Are you getting some tenured teachers? How do you recruit teachers?
It varies. It varies wildly. And we have become more and more intentional about how we seek out candidates because we want to a lot of times seek out more non-traditional teachers, because frequently the traditional teachers went to school and they expect a certain thing when they walk into a classroom, and that's very much not us. You're not going to stand and deliver from the front of the classroom. There's not a lot of lecturing going on, and there's not coaching after school. That's something a lot of young men go to become history teachers so they can coach football. We don't have a football team because we're very focused on what's bottom line important.
Do you have some teachers that are seeking you out because they say, that's what I want to do?
We have a handful, yeah. And that's usually those are the good candidates who are really interested in this environment.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, you shared a lot of very interesting things, and as I shared at the beginning, is I was not familiar with Invictus at all, and I know you and I have talked prior to this, and I've talked with a little bit of your staff prior to this, and I've learned some things, and just very amazed and grateful that there's people like you out there that are taking that personal interest. And as far as Invictus goes, are there other schools like that in the area, in the state? How many are out there? How do they exist? Where are they?
There's a few in the Cleveland area, and there's a few in most of the urban centers. And then, they're all doing good work. They all look a little different. They don't all look like Invictus. They're not all doing the exact same things, but they're working with the same populations and trying to achieve the same goals.
And when they look different because the head of them has a little bit of a different idea, vision?
Each of them has their own school board, and they're all founded with their own mission. Yeah.
So you all have to follow the same curriculum, but exactly how you do that, you have some liberties.
Yeah, we jump through the same hoops that the state puts out there for us in terms of what a kid has to do to graduate.
And you're funded by the state.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
How about volunteers?
We get a handful of community involvement, and we love to have the community into the school. We have speakers in all the time, and that's part of our vocational program, is exposing kids to financial literacy and a lot of other things. If we can bring members of the community in to speak to them. It's been something I'm interested in for a long time, kind of creating a highway for volunteers to come into our school, because it's a tricky thing when you're at school, because you have to background check people because you don't want to expose children to anybody dangerous. But I would love to get people in just to talk to kids about business, to talk to them about opportunities, to explain, how did I get where I am, and how can you get to that place too?
Yeah. Well, you keep me in mind for that.
You got it.
I would truly enjoy to come in and talk to those students.
You're welcome anytime.
I very much would enjoy that. Well, hey, I want to thank you for coming into the show.
And I want to thank you for having me.
This was a great topic. We have not had a show like this, so this is kind of a unique twist for us. I'm thinking the people that are listening probably got some stuff out of here they weren't aware of. I know I wasn't, and I'm sure. And I've talked to some people, knowing that I had this show coming up. I've talked to several people and asked, are you familiar with Invictus? I have a lot of educators in my family, brothers, sister-in-laws, that type of thing. And I had a sister-in-law that was familiar, but only by name. By name. And so I know there's a lot of unknown out there. So hopefully this kind of lets people know that there's schools out there, there's people like you out there that are trying to make a difference. So, hey, thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me, Dan.
Hey, thanks for listening in. Thought this was a great show today. If you like shows like this and you want to follow us more, hit subscribe. We'd love to have you follow us. If you have ideas for shows, send me an email, dharsh@danharsh.com. Would love to hear from you. But hey, thanks for tuning in today.